The rain hammered against the windshield of my old pickup truck, blurring the already faint outlines of the winding country road. Off to my left, barely visible through the downpour and the skeletal branches of winter trees, loomed the imposing, decaying structure of Blackwood Asylum. It had been closed for over 50 years, abandoned after a scandal involving patient mistreatment and a series of unexplained disappearances. For years, locals whispered tales of restless spirits and chilling experiments. As a photographer specializing in abandoned places, the allure was irresistible. I'd heard the stories, of course, but a part of me, the rational part, dismissed them as mere folklore. Tonight, that part of me was about to be profoundly challenged. The heavy iron gates, rusted and overgrown with thorny vines, creaked open with a groan that seemed to echo the very despair of the place. I parked my truck and grabbed my gear, my camera, a few extra lenses, a powerful flashlight, and a small, worn backpack with some water and a protein bar. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decay, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood mixed with disinfectant. I moved slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel path that led to the main building. The asylum was a monolithic structure of dark, crumbling stone, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the storm. Some were shattered, others boarded up, but all of them seemed to hold a silent, terrible story. The main entrance doors, heavy and made of dark oak, were swollen with age and moisture, but a small gap at the bottom suggested they could be forced. With a grunt, I pushed, and the doors groaned open, revealing a cavernous, pitch-black interior. The air inside was colder, heavier, and permeated with a thick, musty odor that made my stomach churn. My powerful flashlight beam cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating a grand, yet utterly derelict, entrance hall. The ceiling was high, adorned with intricate plasterwork now crumbling in places. A wide staircase, its banisters broken and missing, ascended into darkness. Dust lay like a shroud over everything, undisturbed for decades. I took my first few steps inside, my boots echoing unnervingly. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from a leaky ceiling somewhere in the distance and the hammering of rain against the boarded-up windows. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, that made you feel utterly alone, utterly insignificant. I began my exploration, camera in hand, trying to capture the haunting beauty of decay. I moved through what seemed to be a waiting area, then into a long corridor lined with doors. Most were ajar, revealing small, bare rooms with single, rusty beds. These were the patient rooms. Each one felt like a tomb, a testament to countless forgotten lives. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't a malicious feeling, not at first. More like a pervasive sadness, 100 unseen eyes following my every move. The air grew colder the deeper I ventured, and that strange metallic sweet scent intensified. I reached a section of the corridor where the doors were solid metal, with small, barred windows. These were the padded cells. I peered through one of the windows. Inside, the padding was torn and rotted, hanging in strips like gruesome bandages. The darkness within seemed absolute, swallowing my flashlight beam. Suddenly, from one of the cells a few doors down, I heard a faint scraping sound. It was rhythmic, soft, like something dragging against stone. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, my breath held. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud and shaky in the overwhelming silence. Only the rain answered, a relentless tattoo on the roof. The scraping stopped. I told myself it was just the old building, the wind. But there was no wind inside, and the scraping had been distinct, deliberate. I shone my flashlight down the corridor, but saw nothing amiss. The cells remained dark, silent. Still, the feeling persisted. The watchful eyes, the heavy sadness. I moved on, trying to dismiss the noise, but my grip on the flashlight tightened. I found myself in what appeared to be a common room. Broken chairs were scattered about, and a massive, ancient television set with a shattered screen sat in one corner. On the far wall, something was written in what looked like faded, dried blood. My light swept over it. They never left. A chill far colder than the ambient temperature coursed through me. My rational mind tried to find an explanation, old graffiti, a prank. But the smell of blood, faint but undeniable, seemed to rise from the wall itself. As I stared at the grim message, I heard it again, the scraping. This time, it was closer. Much closer. It was coming from behind the door leading back to the corridor I had just walked through. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc across the room. The door to the corridor was slowly, imperceptibly creaking open. My blood ran cold. I saw no one, no hand pushing it, yet it opened further, revealing only the deeper gloom of the hallway. I backed away, my eyes glued to the widening gap. The scraping sound intensified, accompanied by a soft, wet shuffling. It sounded like something dragging itself along the floor. Panic started to set in, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. This wasn't natural. This wasn't the wind. I considered running, but where would I go? Deeper into the asylum? Back the way I came, towards whatever was shuffling in the corridor. My gaze fell upon a large, ornate wooden cabinet in the corner of the common room. It looked like an old medical cabinet, filled with rusted tools and dusty, unlabeled bottles. It was big enough to hide in if I squeezed. It was a desperate thought, but my options were dwindling. With a surge of adrenaline, I darted towards the cabinet, pulling its heavy doors open. The hinges groaned in protest. I slipped inside, pulling the doors shut behind me, plunging myself into absolute darkness. The air inside was stifling, smelling faintly of old chemicals and something even more unsettling, like formaldehyde. I pressed myself against the back wall of the cabinet, hardly daring to breathe. My ears strained, trying to pick up any sound over the frantic pounding of my own heart. The shuffling sound grew louder, closer. It entered the common room. I heard it moving slowly, deliberately, across the floorboards. It stopped. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Then, a faint, ragged gasp, right outside the cabinet. It was a shallow, struggling breath, almost like someone choking. My eyes were squeezed shut, my muscles rigid. I could feel the presence of something on the other side of that thin wooden door. A soft thump against the cabinet door, just inches from my face. Then another, and another. Slow, rhythmic thumps, as if something was pressing against it with a heavy, soft weight. I heard a low moan, deep and resonant, vibrating through the wood of the cabinet. It was filled with unimaginable pain, a sound of profound suffering that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't the mimicked voice from the school. This felt real. This felt ancient. The moaning continued, rising and falling, a horrifying lullaby. It sounded like it was circling the cabinet, moving from one side to the other, never truly leaving. I squeezed my eyes tighter, willing myself to disappear. My hand instinctively reached for my camera, not for a photo, but for comfort, for something familiar to ground me. Hours passed in that suffocating darkness, or so it felt. The moaning continued intermittently, sometimes fading, sometimes intensifying, always close. My legs cramped, my throat was parched, and fear gnawed at my sanity. I kept replaying the image of the writing on the wall. They never left. It wasn't a prank. It was a warning. Just as I thought I would break, the moaning began to fade. The thumping stopped. The shuffling sound, faint now, moved away, slowly retreating back into the corridor. The silence returned, not the oppressive silence from before, but a wary, watchful quiet. I waited, and waited. My muscles screamed in protest, but I didn't dare move. I had no idea how long I stayed in that cabinet, lost in the cold dread. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I slowly, cautiously, pushed the cabinet doors open. The common room was dark, silent, and appeared empty. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom. Nothing. No shadowy figures, no disturbing stains, just the scattered chairs and the broken television. But the air was still heavy, charged with an undeniable presence. I knew I had to get out. My irrational curiosity had gotten me into this, and now sheer terror was my only motivation. I moved quickly, but silently, making my way back through the patient corridors. Each room I passed felt colder, the sense of unseen eyes more intense. The metallic sweet smell was pervasive now, seeming to cling to the very air. I was nearing the entrance hall when I heard it again. Not a moan, not a shuffle, but a faint, almost imperceptible ticking. It was coming from behind one of the heavy, bolted doors that lined the main entrance hall, a door I hadn't noticed before, camouflaged by the shadows and crumbling plaster. It was different from the normal patient rooms. This door was thicker, reinforced. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in such a place, tugged at me. What could be behind that door? Why the ticking? Was it some old clock? Or something else? Despite the icy grip of fear, a primal urge to understand, to witness, pulled me towards it. I approached the door, my flashlight beam fixed on its surface. It had a small, reinforced metal slot at eye level, like a tiny peephole. The ticking was louder now, a precise, mechanical rhythm. Hesitantly, I leaned in and peered through the slot. The flashlight beam from my camera was still on, casting a wide, almost blinding light into the small, confined space beyond. It was a small room, circular, with padded walls like a padded cell, but much smaller, perhaps only a few feet in diameter. And in the center of the room, strapped to a rusted, upright gurney, was a figure. It was a man, gaunt and pale, his skin stretched taut over his bones. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly ahead, devoid of any light or recognition. His mouth was agape, a silent scream frozen on his face. He was clearly long dead, and attached to his chest, with rusted clamps and wires leading to a small, intricate mechanism, was a ticking device. It was old, brass and steel, resembling an antique clockwork. It was ticking ceaselessly, rhythmically. My breath caught in my throat. This was no ordinary patient. This was a horror, a forgotten, grotesque experiment. As my eyes adjusted to the macabre scene, I noticed something else. Carved into the padded wall behind the gurney, scratched deeply into the decaying material, was a single word, repeated over and over, frantically, alone, alone, alone. And then, as I watched, transfixed by the horror, a thin, almost invisible mist began to swirl around the dead man's head, coalescing slowly, forming vague, indistinct features. It was translucent, shimmering like the shadow in the old house, but filled with a cold, desperate despair. The ticking intensified, growing louder, faster, an almost frantic rhythm that echoed the rapid beating of my own heart. The mist around the dead man's head seemed to solidify, to gaze at me through the slot. A chilling whisper, not the mimicry from before, but a raw, tortured sound, seemed to emanate from the room, directly into my mind. Help me. Release me. The whisper was not spoken, but felt. A thought imprinted directly onto my consciousness, chilling me to the bone. This was the source of the persistent sadness, the unseen eyes. The man wasn't just dead. His essence, his torment, was still here, bound to that infernal ticking device. I stumbled back from the door, my mind reeling. The implications were horrifying. This asylum wasn't just haunted by residual energy. Souls were trapped here, their suffering perpetually recycled by unseen mechanisms, by forgotten experiments. The "they never left" wasn't a warning about ghosts in general, but about the patients themselves, eternally bound. The ticking continued, relentless, a grim metronome of despair. I felt an overwhelming urge to smash the device, to free the tortured soul, but the reinforced door, the unknown horrors that still lurked in the asylum. I was no hero. I was a trespasser, already lucky to be alive. I had to get out. Now. I turned and ran, not even bothering to be quiet anymore. My footsteps pounded on the marble floor of the entrance hall, echoing unnervingly. The sounds of the rain were still outside, but now they seemed to welcome me, promising escape. I burst through the main entrance doors, not bothering to close them. The cold, wet night air hit me like a shock, exhilarating in its freedom. I didn't look back at the imposing, dark structure. I ran to my truck, fumbling for the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely insert them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a comforting sound of modernity against the ancient horrors I had just witnessed. I slammed the truck into reverse, tires spitting gravel, and sped down the driveway. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the asylum a dark, distant blot on the horizon, swallowed by the storm. I never went back. I couldn't. The images were burned into my mind. The shadowy figure, the blood-written message, the security guard's lifeless eyes, and the final, unspeakable horror behind the reinforced door. My camera, still in my hand, was clutched so tightly my knuckles were white. I knew I had captured nothing on film. The horrors I witnessed were not of this world, not something a lens could truly capture. They were of the soul, of despair, of the unseen. The experience shattered my rational mind. I no longer dismissed the whispers of locals. The world was far stranger, far darker than I had ever dared to imagine. Blackwood Asylum was not just an abandoned building. It was a prison for the damned, a monument to human cruelty and the lingering echo of suffering. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the wind howls outside, I can still hear it. The faint, relentless ticking. And I wonder, How many more forgotten souls are bound to devices, endlessly reliving their final moments, forever whispering alone in the dark, dark confines of Blackwood Asylum? And how long until their torment spreads, seeping out from those decaying walls to bind us all?